She used her last dollar for a stranger's hospital bill. Not because she had money to spare. She didn't. Not because she knew who he was. She didn't. She looked at a man bleeding on the ground and she didn't calculate. She didn't weigh it. She didn't ask herself if she could afford it. She just thought this person needs help. So she helped. That was who Kimmy was. That was the only reason she needed. The nurses asked her how she knew him. She said she didn't. They asked why she paid. She didn't have an answer for that either. Not one that would make sense to someone who had never been the kind of person who stops. She went home that night with empty pockets and no regrets. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man she just saved was the most feared criminal in all of Seoul, and he was already looking for her. If you're new here, welcome to Afro-Korean Noir Stories. This channel is where we tell the stories nobody else is telling. Powerful black women, dangerous Korean men, and situations that will make your jaw drop. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because we drop stories like this every single week and you don't want to miss a single one. Now, let's get into it. Kimmy Asante had been in Seoul for 8 months. She came from Accra, Ghana. One suitcase, one dream. The kind of hope that only lives in people who haven't been completely broken by life yet. She was 26 years old and she was invisible. Not because she wasn't worth seeing. Because this city had decided the way big cities decide about certain people, that she was background. She carried plates that were too heavy. She mopped the same floors, every single night. She smiled at customers who looked straight through her. And she had not been paid in 4 weeks. Not one. Every time she asked her manager, he had a new story. Next week, Kimmy. The system is slow, Kimmy. Be patient, Kimmy. She was patient. Because what choice did she have? Her visa depended on that restaurant. Her ability to stay in South Korea, everything, was tied to a man named Manager O who kept making promises and kept spending them like they were free. On the night this story begins, Kimmy finished her shift at 11:45. She stepped outside into the cold. The wind had an edge to it. She pulled her coat tight and checked her purse before she started walking. 43,000 Korean won, $30. That was everything. Not most of what she had. Not the small amount left over after bills. That was the complete total. Everything in the world she owned that had a number attached to it. She started walking home. She passed a convenience store burning white light into the dark. 2 taxis idling at a corner. The city moving around her the way cities move around struggling people. Not noticing, not slowing. Just continuing. She was 3 blocks from home when she heard it. Not a crash, not a shout, a wet, struggling sound. Low and rough. The sound of a body trying to hold on and not quite sure it can. She stopped. She stood completely still on that pavement and she listened. And she heard it again. Coming from behind a delivery van parked near the curb. Every sensible part of her said keep walking. It said this is not your problem. It said you are a foreign woman alone at midnight with $30 in your purse. And this is not your city, and this is not your fight. But Kimmy turned around. She walked toward the sound. And she found him. He was slumped against the base of a utility pole, half hidden by the van. A Korean man. His suit was expensive, even soaked dark with blood, even completely ruined. The quality of it was visible. The cut, the fabric, a gold ring on his right hand, Italian shoes on his feet. And 2 gunshot wounds bleeding through his shirt, one in his left shoulder, one below his right rib cage, both of them still pulsing, dark and slow. The blood beneath him had spread wide across the concrete, wide enough that she saw it before she even fully saw him. His face, even like this, was something. Strong jaw. Heavy brow. A scar on the left side of his neck, old and deliberate looking. The kind of scar that comes with a long story. His hands were large. And even unconscious, they were slightly clenched. Like his body didn't know how to fully let go. Kimmy knelt beside him without hesitating. 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was there, unsteady, skipping. But there. She called the emergency line. The operator said 12 to 15 minutes. She looked at the blood spewing across the concrete and understood something very clearly. 12 minutes was too long. She got her arms underneath him. He was twice her weight, dense with muscle. She was not a large woman. But she locked her jaw and planted her feet and moved, one heavy step at a time, pulling him toward the curb. Her coat becoming something she would never wear again. She flagged a taxi. The driver refused when he saw the blood. Kimmy looked at him, not desperately, not with pleading, with the specific look of a woman who is not presenting a request anymore. The driver let them in. At the hospital, they rushed him into surgery. A nurse asked how she knew him. I don't, Kimmy said. I just found him. 40 minutes later, the billing desk came to her. 500,000 won. Initial deposit. The man had no ID, no insurance, no emergency contact, nothing. Kimmy opened her purse. She placed 43,000 won on that counter. She looked at the woman behind the desk and she said, in a voice that didn't waver even a little, "This is everything I have right now. I will bring the rest. I promise you I will bring it. But please help him tonight." The billing woman looked at the money. She looked at Kimmy's eyes, and something in what she saw there made her pick up the money. "We'll treat him," she said. "Come back tomorrow." Kimmy walked home through the cold with empty pockets. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he was. She didn't know that the silence that always moved ahead of him, the kind of silence that cleared rooms without anyone giving a signal, had never, in 15 years, been broken by anyone who survived the attempt. She just went home. But here is what you need to understand before we go any further. You need to know exactly who she saved. His name was Kang Jae-won. And if you had any history with Seoul's underground, that name alone would make your hands go still. He was 41 years old. He'd built the Cheongya Network, the most feared criminal organization on the Korean peninsula, from nothing. He was 19 when he started. No money, no connections, no protection. Nothing but a mind that saw every situation 4 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. 20 years later, the network moved drugs, weapons, clean money, and influence in quantities that would make your eyes water. Politicians sat down with his people and came out persuaded. Judges who needed reminders received them and adjusted. But here is the thing that made him different from every other dangerous man in that city. He wasn't cruel for pleasure. Men who enjoy cruelty are actually manageable. They make mistakes. Emotion drives them. They escalate when they should calculate. Kang Jae-won felt none of that. He was cold the way mathematics is cold. He wanted outcomes. He was efficient. He gave one warning, always exactly one. And then the problem simply stopped existing. There was a story people told in whispers. A man had stolen from the Cheongya Network. He received his warning. He smiled. He did it again. And Jae-won didn't send anyone to hurt him. He made one call, then another. Within 3 months, every single person connected to that man, every supplier, every lender, every associate had quietly stopped doing business with him. 90 days later, the man was bankrupt. 120 days later, he was at the gates of the Cheongya Network begging for any kind of work. Jae-won gave him a job in a warehouse. Because that was the message. Not I will hurt you, but I can erase you. And I can do it without breaking a sweat. His rivals had all arrived independently at the same policy. Distance. You didn't challenge the Cheongya Network. You didn't move on their territory. You paid what you owed, on time, without complaint. When Kang Jae-won walked into a room, the volume dropped. Not because anyone gave a signal. Something animal in every person present just said, He's had survived 15 years at the top without losing once. Which is why what happened next wasn't carelessness. It was something far more dangerous than carelessness. It was a perfectly designed lie. The enemy had a name, the Harang Brotherhood, new. Barely a year consolidated, led by a man named Ryu Sun-tae, who had spent 3 years in Singapore not building power, studying how power fails, how to find the single crack in even the most fortified structure, how to press on it until the whole thing splits. And the crack he found in Kang Jae-won was simple, not greed, not arrogance, familiarity. Ryu Sun-tae spent months doing nothing but studying the people around Jae-won, not the inner circle he knew. He'd never reached the inner circle directly. He studied the edges, the people adjacent to the Cheongya Network, known, familiar, trusted not because they'd been deeply vetted, but because their faces had appeared enough times that the brain had filed them under safe. He found his instrument in a man named Park Dong-soo. 53 years old, logistic ISBR, 11 years working adjacent to the Cheongya Network, never inside, never fully out, present at enough meetings that everyone recognized his face. But not a man anyone thought was worth protecting specifically. That was exactly why Ryu Sun-tae chose him. They got to him through his daughter. A debt of 40 billion won. They purchased the debt quietly. Then they paid Park Dong-soo a visit. The conversation was short. Park Dong-soo became their instrument by the end of it. The message he passed was crafted to be irresistible. A senior lieutenant from the rival Yongma Syndic wanted to defect. He had financial records, names of informants, locations of safe houses, intelligence that could shift the entire balance of power in Seoul overnight. But he would only meet Kang Jae-won personally, tonight. Old Warehouse District in Songdong, 11 p.m. Jae-won read the message and found 3 things he didn't like. The location was too isolated, the timing was too tight, and the demand for personal attendance was unusual. He told Minjun. I don't like it, Minjun said immediately. Neither do I, Jae-won said. But if it's real, we can't walk away from it. They compromised. 2 advance scouts went in an hour early. They swept the perimeter, the entrance, both side exits. They used thermal imaging on the windows. They came back clean. What no one checked, what no one had thought to check, were the drainage channels beneath the warehouse floor. Old industrial building, deep drainage running under the concrete. Where 12 men from the Harang Brotherhood had been lying completely flat in the dark and the cold for 4 hours. Not moving, barely breathing, waiting. Jae-won arrived at 10:58 with 4 men. He stepped inside. One work light burned in the center of the enormous floor, a small yellow circle in all that darkness. A man he'd never seen stood in it. He raised his hand in greeting. Jae-won wasn't listening to the words anymore. He was listening to the acoustics. The echo came from too many directions, too many surfaces. Like the space held more people than his eyes could account for. And the man in the light, he wasn't sweating. A man about to betray his organization would be terrified. This man was performing calm. And performed calm looks different from real calm, if you know what you're looking at. Half a second of realization. That was all he had. Down, he barked. His men dropped. The warehouse floor exploded. 3 drainage panels burst open. 12 armed men came up from the concrete like they'd been growing there. Blinding lights blazed on from all directions. His 4 men were surrounded instantly. Jae-won moved. Not back, through. He hit the man in the light with enough force to knock him sideways. Ducked under a grabbing arm. Cut left along the wall toward the exit his scouts had confirmed was clear. The first bullet caught his left shoulder. It spun him into the wall. The pain was enormous, white and electric. But he kept moving. Because stopping was dying and he knew the geography of dying well enough to negotiate with it. The second bullet caught him below the right rib cage. This one was different. It went in and stayed. And the warmth that spread from it immediately told him this was serious. The kind of damage that has a clock attached to it. He hit the side exit at full speed. Cold air hit him, and 30 meters away, exactly where Minjun had positioned it without being told, because that was what Minjun did. A car was idling. He made it. He got in. Drive, he said. The city lights began to blur through the windshield. He pressed his hand against his side and looked at it, and registered how dark the blood was. He reached for his phone. And then the blood loss crossed the threshold. The lights smeared and doubled and went soft at the edges, and Kang Jae-won, the silence always preceded, folded against the door. The driver panicked, pulled over, couldn't think straight, drove 3 blocks, stopped again. Looked at the blood on the seats and did the thing that saved his boss's life entirely by accident. He opened the door and ran, and the door swung open, and Jae-won slid out and came to rest against a utility pole. On a street in Mapogu, at 11:45 at night. 3 minutes before Kimmy Asante finished her shift, the next morning 2 men walked into St. Mary's Hospital in dark suits. They moved through the lobby the way authority moves, like the space already partly belonged to them. ID wallets flipped open and closed with practiced ease. They sat down across from Kimmy in the waiting area and introduced themselves as Detective Wu and Detective Im. They were not police, but they looked exactly like police. And right now Kimmy had no reason to think otherwise. She told them everything, clearly, chronologically. The sound she heard, the street, the blood, the taxi, the money on the counter. She told it the way honest people tell things, clean and without decoration. She watched their faces while she talked. Something bothered her, they weren't taking notes. Detectives always took notes. And once, just once, the shorter one's eyes moved toward the corridor behind her. Quickly, like he was checking for something. Not out of curiosity, out of habit, but she filed it away. Because she was a foreign worker, with a visa that required good behavior, and she told herself, "Don't look for reasons to be suspicious of the police." "Miss Asante," the tall one said, and his voice shifted slightly, between official and confiding. "The man you helped last night is Kang Jae-won. He runs the Cheongya Network, one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in this country. We've been trying to bring him in for over a decade." "I didn't know that," Kimmy said. "We understand. You couldn't have known." He leaned forward. "Your involvement was innocent, but it's put you in a complicated position. We may need to reach out as this develops." "Of course," she said. "I'll help however I can." They thanked her. They left. She sat alone with her cooling coffee and turned the conversation over. "They told me who he was without me asking. Police gather information. They don't share it. Not with witnesses, not without a reason." She pressed the feeling down. But it didn't go away. It just waited. Choi Minjun hadn't slept. He found out within 20 minutes. A barely coherent text from the driver. "I'm sorry, I left him, something happened," and in the first few seconds Minjun went completely still. That was how he handled crises. Everything on the outside went calm. Everything on the inside ran at full speed. Within 6 hours he had what he needed. St. Mary's Hospital, 4th floor, private room. A young Ghanaian woman had brought him in. He was alive. Stable. He also had something else. Two of Ryu Sung-tae's men had visited the hospital that morning, spoken to the woman. And now they were watching the building. Minjun sat 8 men down at a table in their secondary base in Yeouido, and told them exactly what was going to happen. "No weapons," he said before anyone spoke. "A hospital, police involvement, 1 shot fired and that building locks down and we lose him permanently." He looked around the table. "We go in as staff. We bring him out without anyone knowing we were there." The window was the ICU shift change at 2 p.m. Between 1:55 and 2:10, while the incoming staff received their handover briefing, the private recovery rooms had a documented gap in oversight, 15 minutes. He needed 2 men dressed as doctors, 2 as nurses, 1 in the basement with a laundry cart. one outside in a hospital-registered ambulance at the service entrance. The monitors in Jae-won's room had to be disconnected in a precise order to stop the nursing station from triggering an alarm. Min-jun had memorized that order from a video his contact inside sent him. He briefed the men on it until they could recite it cold. He looked at each of them. Exactly what I described. Exactly the sequence I described. No improvisation, no panic. He stood. 4 hours from now, he's out. At 1:52, a man in a white coat and a perfect replica hospital ID stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor and walked the corridor with the unhurried authority of someone who belonged there completely. 30 seconds later, a second doctor. Then 2 nurses, separately 2 minutes apart. Nobody questioned any of them. They had the clothes, they had the walk, and they had clipboards, which may be the single most powerful prop in the history of human deception. The corridor was clear. At 1:58, the 2 doctors entered room 412 and closed the door behind them. Min-jun sat in the ambulance in the basement, phone in hand, earpiece in, completely still. The concrete ceiling was low above the vehicle. The engine was off, it smelled of diesel and antiseptic. He's here, a voice in his ear, low and controlled. He's awake, partially. His eyes are open. Min-jun closed his own eyes for exactly 1 second. Tell him it's us, he said. A pause. Then, through the earpiece, rough and distant and barely there, the sound of a single breath being let go. The specific exhale of a man who has been waiting in the dark and just heard the light switch click. He says. The voice from inside steadied itself. He says he was wondering what took so long. Min-jun pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and said nothing for a moment. Tell him to save it for when we're out, Has. Disconnect the monitors. In order. Now. At the nursing station at the far end of the corridor, the green lines from room 412 flatlined on the secondary monitor. An alarm tone began to build. One of the nurses at the station glanced at it. That one's been disconnecting all morning, she said, with the tired certainty of someone who had filed 3 maintenance reports and stopped, expecting results. Loose lead. Already reported. Her colleague nodded without looking up. The alarm was silenced. Because it was more convenient for it to be a loose lead than to investigate. And convenience beats vigilance almost every time. The laundry cart moved through the service corridor at 2:07. The basement elevator smelled of cleaning fluid and old metal. The service exit opened onto a loading bay where the ambulance was already running. At 2:14, it pulled into Mapogu traffic and disappeared. At 2:15, the hospital discovered room 412 was empty. Inside the ambulance, Jae-won was lying flat with an IV in his arm, looking at the roof of the vehicle. Min-jun sat beside him, checking the line. The city moved outside the small high windows, tie lights, street lamps, the ordinary evening world doing ordinary evening things. The woman, Jae-won said. His voice was stripped down, rough. Min-jun looked at him. We're already on it. She paid. A pause. She had nothing and she paid for someone she'd never met. Min-jun didn't answer right away. He looked at the IV line, then he looked at his boss. I know, he said. Find her, Jae-won said. He closed his eyes. And somewhere beneath the blood loss, and the exit wounds, and the weight of a 15-year empire pressing down on his chest, Kang Jae-won thought about a woman from Ghana, who had stopped when the entire city kept walking. In 15 years nobody had surprised him, not once. Kimmy came back to the hospital the next morning. She'd borrowed 200,000 won from her neighbor Jisoo, a kind university student, hadn't asked questions because Kimmy's face had made questions feel unnecessary. She put it in an envelope and went straight to the 4th floor. The nurse at the desk looked at her carefully. The patient in room 412 is no longer here, she said. He was transferred. Overnight. Kimmy stared at her. Transferred where? I can't give more information than that, I'm sorry. Kimmy walked back out into the thin morning light and stood on the pavement. Transferred patients in that condition don't transfer overnight without extensive documentation. Without family consent. Without a paper trail a kilometer long. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Miss Asante. The voice of the man who called himself Detective Wu. Are you free to meet this morning? There have been some developments. The car was black and unmarked and parked in an underground lot in Yeouido. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed and flickered. One of them was half dead, throwing everything into an uneven yellow. Not a precinct, not an office, a parking lot. Kimmy noted this. She got in anyway. He escaped, the tall man said, turned in the front seat to face her. His people pulled him out last night. I see, she said. You are the only known civilian with a direct connection to him. His voice was careful, practiced. You saved him. In certain interpretations, that connection could look like more than coincidence. Kimmy kept her face completely still. I found a dying man on a public street, and I called for help, she said. How is that a criminal connection? The man almost smiled. You're intelligent, so let me stop wasting your time. He leaned forward slightly. The leather of the seat creaked. His people will come looking for you. Men like Kang Jae-won don't forget a debt, especially not this kind. When they make contact, we need you to accept. Get close. Location, movements, security arrangements. That's all we need, and if I say no, Kimmy said. The shorter man spoke for the first time, flat, unhurried. Your transition visa expired 3 weeks ago. A formal complaint triggers a review. You could be on a flight back to Accra within 10 days. Kimmy looked at the back of the front seat. She thought about 8 months of working invisible. About Manager O's hollow promises. About the Goziwan room barely wide enough to stretch her arms. About the dream she'd carried here in a single suitcase. What exactly do I say to them, she asked. The tall man settled back, satisfied. Just be available, he said. They'll do the rest. She got out of the car. She stood on the ramp of the parking structure and breathed the cold air, and told herself she was doing what she had to do. She had no way of knowing that the man she was about to spy on had already been told she was coming. The envelope came 4 days later. Cream paper. A symbol she didn't recognize. An address in Songpagu. A time. And one line on the back. For the woman who paid what she didn't have to pay, she went. The building was unremarkable outside. Inside. Clean lines, low lighting. Art on the walls that was quiet and clearly worth more than she'd make in 5 years. A man in a dark suit met her in the lobby and led her to an elevator without speaking. The elevator rose in silence. The carpet in the corridor was thick enough to swallow sound. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below them, enormous and lit, and Kang Jae-won was sitting in a chair by the glass. He looked different from the man she'd dragged to a taxi in the dark. The pallor was still there, faint. His left arm held slightly carefully because of what was beneath his shirt. But he was present, fully, completely. The way she already sensed was simply how he existed in any room, like he'd decided to be there and the room had accepted the terms. He looked at her for a long moment without saying anything. She didn't look away. She was 26 years old and she'd carried this man through a city that didn't care about either of them. She didn't need to perform smallness for anyone. Something moved in his expression, very small, very fast. Sit down, he said. She sat. He studied her with the open directness of a man who had long ago decided that pretending not to assess people was a waste of everyone's time. She let him look. There was nothing he was going to find that she was ashamed of. You paid, he said. You needed help, she said. That's not an answer to what I said. It's the only answer I have. A pause. What do you do? She told him. The restaurant, the unpaid wages, the visa, she told it plainly. No performance, just facts. He listened, actually listened. With the focused attention of someone who heard all of what a person was saying. Not just the parts that were convenient. I need someone to manage this residence, he said when she finished. The pay is good. The work isn't complicated. He looked at her steadily. If you want it. Kimmy thought about the men in the black car, about what they needed her to find out. About how much easier this had just become. Yes, she said, I'll take it. He nodded once. What he didn't say. I know exactly why you said yes. And it isn't the reason you think she was good at the work. Genuinely. She moved through the residence with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been managing difficult spaces her whole life. She observed everything. She filed it carefully into 2 categories in her mind. What they wanted to know, and what she was learning for herself. The 2 categories were supposed to stay separate. They kept bleeding into each other. Here is what she hadn't expected. He was disciplined in a way that had nothing to do with his criminal reputation. Up before 6 every morning. 2 hours of physical training, alone. In a room with mirrored walls and rubber floors, and the kind of focused quiet she associated with people who were serious about something larger than themselves. Books in 3 languages on the shelves, annotated in all 3. He spoke to Minjun in a shorthand built from decades, not just years, and he was not cruel. She had braced for it. She'd been told what he was. She'd waited for the confirmation. It didn't come. He was remote, economical with words. He didn't make anyone comfortable and he didn't try to. But he wasn't unkind. There was a difference. One afternoon, she dropped a serving tray. It hit the dining room floor with a crash that rang through the whole quiet residence, and she stood there with the pieces in her hands, her heart hammering. He looked up from his document. He looked at the tray, then at her. Are you hurt? He said. No, she said. He went back to reading. She stood there for a long moment with the broken pieces in her hands. He asked if I was hurt before he asked about the tray. She filed that. She tried not to. She called the number once a week as instructed. She gave them the confirmed address. The floor layout. Fragments of the security structure. She'd mapped the rotation schedule, the entry points, the general pattern. She hadn't given them movement schedules yet. She kept finding reasons not to. But they were running out of patience. And patience, she was about to learn, was the only thing standing between her and something she couldn't take back. She gave them what they needed on a Tuesday evening. She called the number from the bathroom, the cold tile floor, the single bare bulb overhead, the sound of the city faint and distant through the small frosted window. She told them about the security rotation. The window when the floor was lightest. The layout they could use. The tall man on the other end sounded satisfied. She hung up and sat on the edge of the bathtub and told herself she'd done the right thing. She almost believed it. The next morning, she was washing dishes at the kitchen sink when Minjun appeared in the doorway. He just stood there. The morning light came through the window behind him at an angle, and the kitchen smelled of coffee going cold on the counter. Neither of them spoke for a moment. 6 armed men were outside this building last night, he said, completely level. They knew the entry points, the floor, the layout. Kimmy's hands went still in the water. Nobody was hurt. They were stopped before they reached the building. His eyes didn't move from her face. Do you know anything about this? She looked at him, and something in her that was faster than her thinking brain said, if you say yes, you don't leave this kitchen, and something quieter underneath said, if you lie, you become exactly what you said you weren't. No, she said. Minjun held her gaze for a long time. His face gave nothing. Then he nodded once and left. She looked down at the water in the sink. It had gone cold without her noticing. Her hands were still inside it. The men in that car were not police. She'd known it for weeks in a place she'd been refusing to look. Police had precincts, procedures, forms in triplicate. They met you in offices with recorders on tables. They didn't threaten deportation in underground parking lots. She had given the floor plan and the security windows of this building to the people who tried to kill Kang Jae-won. If the men last night had gotten through. She pulled her hands out of the cold water. If they had gotten through, it would have been because of her. He called her to the main room 2 evenings later. The room faced west. At this hour, the whole city outside the windows was burning orange and deep gold. She came in and he was standing by the glass with his back to her, his hands clasped behind him looking out. He didn't turn around right away. Sit down, he said. She sat. The leather of the chair was cold. The room smelled faintly of cedar from the paneling on the far wall and something like ink. The document on the desk, still open from whatever he'd been reading before she came in. He turned. He looked at her, and his face was doing something she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not threat. Something underneath both of those. Something that took a moment to place because he wore it so rarely. Something that looked, in a certain light, like the very beginning of tired. I know about Ryu Sung-tae's men, he said quietly. The ones you've been calling. The room changed. Not loud, not sudden, just changed. The way air pressure changes before something arrives. She didn't speak. They told you they were police, he said. They said your visa was at risk. That you had no choice. He moved from the window and sat down across from her. The table between them was low and dark wooded. Close enough that she could see the small scar at the edge of his jaw she hadn't noticed before. And you believe them? I had no reason not to, she said. They're not police, he said. They're Ryu Sung-tae's operations team, the same organization that put 2 bullets in me. A pause. You've been passing information to the people trying to kill me. While living in my house. Yes, she said. No flinching, no deflection. He looked at her for a long time after that. The men they sent based on your information, they weren't there to arrest me, he said. They were there to finish the job. The full weight of that settled on her. I'm sorry, she said. And it came from somewhere so deep and clean that it wasn't a performance. It was simply the truth arriving in the only form it could. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with that complete attention of his, the kind that doesn't miss anything, that reads not just words but the architecture underneath them. She held it. She didn't look away. They'll contact you again, he said finally. His voice had shifted into something quieter, more precise. They think the operation failed because of a breach on their end. They don't suspect you. He leaned forward slightly. I want you to answer when they call. Tell them you have better information. A confirmed meeting, his full senior leadership, a restaurant, a date, how many men, all of it. Kimmy looked at him steadily. None of that will be true, none of it. She understood. She understood everything he was describing. She understood why he was asking her specifically, rather than simply removing her from the equation. Which would have been simpler, and cleaner, and well within the kind of man she'd been told he was. But she asked it anyway. You could have made me disappear, she said. When you found out, that would have been easier. He was quiet for a moment. You walked into a street at midnight, he said. You carried a stranger to a hospital and paid for his life with everything you had. For no reason, no benefit to yourself, nothing in return. He looked at her directly. I don't punish that. The room held what he just said. Kimmy looked at her hands, then she looked at him, and after she said, when it's done, what happens to me? Your visa is resolved, he said. The wages manager owes you come back, with interest. A pause. And the people who threatened you are no longer in a position to threaten anyone. Your word, she said. My word, he said. She nodded. Tell me what I need to say to them, she said. She called 3 days later. She sat on the edge of the bed in her room. The window was dark. The city hummed 9 floors below. She held the phone with both hands and breathed once, carefully, and dialed. The tall man answered on the second ring. I have something, Kimmy said. Her voice was exactly right. Urgent underneath a surface that was working hard to stay calm. Something real. The sharpening of attention on the other end was immediate. Tell me. A meeting. Thursday night. His full senior leadership. They're confirming a territory agreement. A restaurant in Mapogu, private dining room on the 3rd floor. I overheard him on the phone this morning. She let her breath catch. Just slightly, just enough. He'll have 8 men, maybe 10. Silence on the line. The sound of a man running calculations. That's exactly what we needed, he said. The satisfaction in his voice was naked, unguarded. You've done the right thing, Miss Asante. After Thursday, none of this will be your problem anymore. She said goodbye. She hung up. She sat in the dark room with the silent phone in her hands. After Thursday, none of this will be your problem anymore. He had meant it as comfort. He had no idea how completely correct it was going to be. The restaurant in Mapogu was real. A genuine establishment. 3rd floor private dining room exactly as she'd described. Accessible from the main staircase, the service elevator, and a kitchen entrance opening onto a back alley. Real tables, real chairs, real cutlery set out on white linen. The Harang Brotherhood sent 14 men, 3 vehicles, staggered arrivals, professional spacing, some in suits through the front, some in delivery uniforms at the kitchen entrance. They moved with the quiet, coordinated efficiency of people who'd done this before, who expected to reach a room full of targets and end it quickly. Here is what they didn't know. Minjun's people had been inside the building for 24 hours. In the kitchen. Behind the bar. In the supply room adjoining the 3rd floor dining room. Pressed flat into corners and stairwells and ceiling spaces in the dark. 18 men. Completely silent. Completely still. They also didn't know that their 3 vehicles had been identified and radioed in 40 minutes before the first one arrived. Chiangya network lookouts had been watching every street within 400 meters since Tuesday morning. And they didn't know that Kang Jae-won was not inside. He was across the street. In a parked car, engine off, hands around a paper cup of coffee. He watched the front team enter. He watched the delivery team move around to the back. He watched 14 men walk into a building they believed was full of their enemy. Confident, unhurried, certain. He picked up his phone. All inside, he said. Minjun's voice came back immediately. All inside. A pause. The coffee was warm against his palms. The street outside was ordinary. Taxis. Pedestrians, a couple walking slowly past the restaurant entrance without looking up. Close it, he said. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not clean. It was not quiet. But it was complete. In the way Kang Jae-won had always preferred things to be complete. Total. Irreversible. Without need for anything further. He put the phone down on the seat beside him. He looked at the restaurant across the street and finished his coffee. He thought about a woman from Ghana. About a street in Mapogu. About 43,001 placed on a hospital counter in the middle of the night by a person who had nothing left and paid anyway. He started the car. 3 days later, a man Kimmy had never seen walked into Harang restaurant and had a short private conversation with manager O. She never heard what was said. But by the end of that day, 5 weeks of owed wages arrived in her account, with an additional 30% that manager O called a reconciliation fee and didn't explain. Her visa renewal, pending for 7 weeks with no movement, was approved in 48 hours. She heard nothing further from the tall man or his associate. She hadn't expected to. 10 days after Thursday, she was walking home from an evening shift. The same route, the same pavement, the same cold air and city noise, when a black car slowed beside her. The window came down. Minjun was driving. He looked at her with the same unreadable expression he always wore and said, "He'd like a word if you're willing." She looked at the car. She looked at the street. She looked at the route home, perfectly available, nobody stopping her. All right, she said. Jae-won was in the back. Better than she'd seen him. The color returned to his face, the particular alertness that was simply his natural state fully restored. He looked at her when she got in and said, without preamble, "The position is still open if you want it." "The maid position," she said. "No." A pause. And that small thing moved in his face. The thing she'd been trying to name for weeks. The thing that looked, when it arrived, like the closest his face knew how to come to warmth. Something else. Administrative coordination. Managing assets. Work that needs someone precise and discreet and completely unable to be bought. He looked at her. "I've met perhaps 4 people in my life who can't be bought. You're the most recent." Kimmy looked at her hands, then she looked at him. "There are things I won't do," she said. "Lines I won't cross." "I know," he said. "We'll define them." The car moved through the city. Outside the windows, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did. Enormous and indifferent and continuing. A million lives happening at once, none of them touching, none of them aware. Inside the car it was quiet. Not the quiet of threat or distance. The quiet of 2 people who had looked at each other completely honestly and found, in the looking, something neither of them had expected. Something neither of them had a name for yet. but real. She looked out at the lights passing on the wet street and thought about the night she'd heard a sound behind a van and turned around. About the cold pavement under her knees. About $30 on a hospital counter, and the particular piece of a decision made not because it was smart or safe, but because it was simply the only thing she was. Okay, she said. He nodded once, and the city moved around them, not knowing, not caring, the way it always had. But this time, Kimmy wasn't invisible inside it. Want to know what happened next? Part 2 is available on Gumroad. Link in the description. If you made it to the end of this story, then you already know, this one hit different. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you found him on that street? Would you have stopped? Would you have paid? I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. Turn on notifications, because the sequel to this story is coming. And I promise you, you are not ready for what happens next between Kimmy and Kang Jae-won. This is Afro Korean Noir Stories. I'll see you in the next one.